You ever stop and think, what is actually going on when you talk to an AI? It feels like magic, right? Well, today we're diving into an idea that pulls back the curtain on that magic. It's this fascinating blend of tech, philosophy, and, well, us. It's called cybernetics.
All right, so let's get right to the heart of it. We see these AIs, these large language models, and they're doing things that are just mind-blowing. But let's be real, under the hood, they're just machines, right? So the big juicy question is this: how on earth do these simple machines pull off such a powerful, convincing illusion of being intelligent?
Okay, so the way we're going to look at this today really flips the script. Check out this quote. It says, "They're just sophisticated but stupid mechanical electronic machines." So the interesting part isn't asking how does the machine work. The real question is, how do they produce this astounding illusion on us? See that shift? It's not about what the machine is, it's all about what happens in that moment of interaction between us and the machine.
So to really get our heads around this, we've got a roadmap. First, we'll talk about the alluring machine. Then, we'll uncover science's great blind spot. After that, we're going to look at the mind in a whole new way, as a gesture. Then we'll get practical with the practice of cybernetics, and finally, we'll see how this all leads to something called a deeper rationality. Sound good? Let's jump in!
All right, section 1, the alluring machine. Let's dig into this, and a really common mistake we all tend to make.
You know how we talk about AI? We say things like, it's so smart, or it understands me. We talk as if the intelligence is a thing, a property inside the machine. Well, that's what's called the technology by itself fallacy. And the idea here, it's actually pretty simple, but it's huge. That intelligence, it's not in the box. It's something that happens, something that emerges in the space between you and the machine. It's created in the interaction.
Okay, so if the interaction is what really matters, why do we keep falling into this trap of thinking the tech is smart all by itself? Well, that's a great question, and it leads us right into our second section, science's great blind spot.
For a long time, the main way science has tried to understand our minds is through a lens called cognitivism. The basic idea? The mind is a computer. Simple as that. You've got an objective world out there, your brain takes in data from it, processes it like software, and then spits out a result. And look, this model has been super influential, but, and this is a big but, it's missing a massive piece of the puzzle.
And here it is. Here's the core of the problem. The so-called blind spot of this whole scientific approach is the scientists themselves. It's their own personal lived experience. In the quest to be totally objective, to only look at third-party data, brain scans, behavior, science has accidentally left out the most important thing: what it actually feels like to have a mind. That subjective, first-person view is just gone.
So, if the mind isn't a computer in our skull, then what the heck is it? This is where things get really interesting. Let's check out a completely different way of thinking about it in Section 3. The mind is a gesture.
The alternative on the table is a theory called inaction, and it flips the whole thing on its head. With inaction, thinking isn't about processing data that's already out there. It's about sense-making. And the idea is that we, as living, breathing, moving beings, we literally bring forth a world through what we do. The mind and the world aren't two separate things, with one looking at the other. Nope, they arise together, hand in hand.
This comparison makes it so clear. On one side, you have the old cognitivist view. The world is like a manual to be read, and knowing is just about representing that information correctly. The mind is software. But on the other side, you have the enactive view, and it's a totally different vibe. The world is a dance to be performed. Knowing is doing. The mind isn't software, it's this living, embodied gesture.
And this quote from Christopher Rigon, who came up with the whole idea of cybernetics, just nails it. He says, "Thinking is for me an embodied and living gesture." Just feel that for a second. It takes thinking from being this cold, abstract computer-like process to something that's personal, dynamic, and, well, alive.
Okay, that's a beautiful idea, right? The mind as a living gesture. But it raises a big question. How do you even begin to study something like that? Well, that brings us to the really practical part, Section 4, the practice of cybernetics.
So the story behind this is pretty cool. The guy who developed this whole framework, he was playing around with computer simulations of how we think. But here's the twist. His goal wasn't to build a smarter AI. Not at all. He wanted to use the technology to understand his own mind better. He was looking for a name for this whole process, this practice of using tech to deepen our own self-understanding, and he landed on cybernetics.
So what is cybernetics in a nutshell? Think of it as a practice.
a discipline. It's reflexive, meaning it's about looking back at yourself. It pulls together ideas from a few places: cybernetics, which is all about systems and feedback loops, and action, which we just talked about, and ethics. And this is the absolute key takeaway. The whole point is not to build a better AI. The point is to use technology as a kind of mirror to help us understand how we make meaning in the world.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. It's a hands-on method. It's a cycle. Step 1. You engage with a computer simulation. The kind of models that are the ancestors of today's machine learning. Step 2. You stop and reflect on your own first-person experience. What did that feel like? What did you notice? Step 3. You try to connect that personal, subjective feeling to the formal third-person knowledge, the sciencey stuff. And then, step 4. You do it all again. You repeat the loop, and each time you go a little deeper.
One of the key tools in the Cybernetics toolbox is something called a conceptual dipole. Now that sounds fancy, but the idea is actually super intuitive. It's a way of thinking that doesn't run away from complexity, it leans into it. So instead of being forced to choose between two opposite ideas, like A or B, you hold them both in your mind at the same time. You look at things that seem like opposites, but actually depend on each other. The whole point isn't to decide which one is right, but to hang out in that creative tension between them and see what you discover.
And here are some perfect examples of what I'm talking about. Think about form versus process, a thing versus what it does, or the part versus the whole. You can't have one without the other, right? And the big one we've been talking about, subjective versus objective, the first-person view versus the third-person view. The whole argument here is that true insight, real understanding, doesn't come from picking a side. It comes from learning to think with that tension.
Okay, so we've got this practice, right? This method of holding these tensions to get a better handle on our own minds. So what? Where does all this lead? Well, it leads to something pretty profound. Our final section, moving toward a deeper rationality. The ultimate goal here, the big prize, is to develop what is called a second-order rationality.
The source material calls it a lived and emancipatory technoscience. I know, that's a mouthful, but the core idea is actually really simple. A first-order science acts as if the scientist, the observer, is invisible, like they're not even in the room. A second-order rationality does the exact opposite. It consciously and intentionally brings the observer, with all their messy, subjective, first-person experience, right back into the center of the picture. It's a way of knowing that always includes the knower.
So, why should you care about any of this? Here's why. We're living in an age that's going to be defined by AI. And in that world, understanding our own minds, figuring out how we actually make sense of things, that's not just a fun philosophical exercise anymore. It's an absolutely essential tool. It's about ethics. It's about how we're going to navigate this incredibly complex future we're building.
So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. As we pour all of this energy and genius into building artificial intelligence, maybe, just maybe, the real final frontier is turning that lens around and finally starting to understand our own natural intelligence?